They offered him $12. In 1915, that was a fortune. But the price wasn't just labor. It was skin, blood, and a level of pain most men couldn't endure for even an hour. This isn't just a story about a farm boy. It's the secret blueprint of how a legend is forged in the heat of an Idaho sun. Imagine the sharp, clean bite of early morning air in Cache Valley, Idaho, summer 1915. The sun has barely crested the jagged purple silhouette of the Bear River Range, painting the sky in soft streaks of rose and gold. A thin veil of mist clings to the ground, cool and damp against your skin, carrying the rich, loamy scent of freshly turned earth, mixed with the sweet green tan of growing sugar beets. In the distance, a rooster's crow cuts through the stillness sharp, insistent, while the low, rhythmic lowing of dairy cows drifts from the barns like a sleepy lullaby. The world feels vast yet intimate, every sound amplified in the quiet before the day's heat descends. On the Benson farm, a hardworking 40 acres spread just outside the tiny community of Whitney, 16-year-old boy named Ezra Taft Benson, called T by everyone who knows him, is already moving. The house is a sturdy 2-story frame building, its white clapboard siding weathered by years of sun and wind. Smoke curls lazily from the kitchen chimney, carrying the warm, comforting aroma of frying bacon, fresh-baked bread, and percolating coffee on the wood stove. Inside, the floorboards creak underfoot, worn smooth by the constant traffic of 11 children. The air smells faintly of kerosene lamps, lye soap, and the lingering sweetness of yesterday's apple pie cooling on the windowsill. Ezra rises in the pre-dawn dark, his bare feet meeting the cool plank floor with a soft thud. He dresses quickly rough denim overalls, a faded long-sleeved shirt, heavy work boots that lace up to the ankle, and a wide-brimmed straw hat to shield his eyes from the coming glare. His hands, already calloused and scarred from years of labor, move with practiced efficiency as he washes his face in the tin basin, the cold water stinging his cheeks and snapping him fully awake. From the time he could toddle, Ezra had been immersed in the sensory rhythm of farm life. The smell of fresh hay sweet, dusty, sun-warmed, had been his first blanket. The rough texture of horsehair reigns in his small hands at age 4, the steady clop-clop of hooves on packed dirt as he guided the team pulling the hay wagon. By age 10, his palms were toughened from gripping the short-handled hoe while thinning sugar beets, each swing of the blade sending a sharp jolt up his arms, the metallic tang of soil and sap clinging to his skin. Twice a day, he milked 30 cows, the warm, rhythmic squirt of milk into the tin pail, the rich, creamy smell filling the barn, the soft swish of tails against his back as the animals shifted in their stanchions. When his father, George T. Benson, Jr., was called away on a 2-year mission to Europe in 1913, Ezra, then only 14, stepped into the role of man of the house. The weight of it settled on his young shoulders like a heavy yoke, yet he bore it without complaint. Mornings began with the sharp crack of splitting wood, the satisfying thud as the axe bit deep, wood chips flying in fragrant bursts of pine resin. He hauled water from the well, the rope rough and wet in his palms, the bucket sloshing cold against his legs. He fed the pigs, their eager grunts, and the earthy smell of slop mixing with the morning dew. School at the Oneida State Academy was a brief respite chalk dust on his fingers, the faint scent of ink and old books, but the real classroom was the land. There he learned that soil has its own language, the soft give of good loam underfoot, the gritty crunch of dry clay when the rains fail, the pungent rot of overwatered rows. He learned the patience of waiting for seeds to break the surface, the sharp satisfaction of a straight furrow plowed true. By the summer of 1915, Ezra was 16 and already built like a man tall, broad-shouldered, muscles corded from endless days of lifting, hoeing, and wrestling stubborn livestock. His skin was bronzed deep by the sun, his hands rough as leather, his eyes clear and steady, carrying the quiet certainty of someone who has already faced more than most boys his age. He spoke softly, rarely wasting words, but when he did speak, his voice was calm and kind, the voice of someone who had learned early that strength is shown in service, not in shouting. That summer, a neighboring farmer, whose field stretched far beyond the Bensons, needed help with the sugar beet thinning. The job was notorious for its brutality. Sugar beets grew thick and fast. The seedlings had to be thinned by hand, using a short-handled hoe to chop out the weaker plants, so the survivors had space to swell into fat, sugar-rich roots. The work demanded endless hours bent double, back screaming, hands blistering, under a sun that felt like a hot iron pressed against your neck. Most grown men could manage only a quarter or half an acre in a full day. A full acre in one day? It was spoken of as impossible, a task for machines or teams of workers, not a lone boy. The neighbor offered $12 whole dollars for the job. In 1915, that sum could buy a new winter coat for each of the younger siblings, or sacks of flour and sugar to last the family through months of winter storms. Ezra accepted without a flicker of hesitation. He did not boast. He simply nodded and said, "I'll give it everything I've got." The night before, he lay in his narrow bed, the mattress ticking rustling beneath him, the room filled with the soft breathing of his sleeping brothers and sisters. Outside, crickets sang in the dark, a steady chorus that rose and fell like the pulse of the earth itself. Ezra stared at the ceiling, feeling the ache already building in his shoulders, just thinking about tomorrow. He prayed quiet, earnest, familiar words that had become second nature, for strength, for endurance, for the will to keep swinging the hoe long after his body begged to stop. As the first gray light seeped through the window, he rose. The kitchen smelled of hot oatmeal, cinnamon, and fresh milk straight from the cow. His mother, Sarah, pressed a thick slice of bread and a slice of cheese into his hand, her fingers lingering on his arm for a moment longer than usual. "Go with God, son," she whispered, her voice thick with pride and quiet worry. He kissed her cheek soft, smelling faintly of lye soap and lavender, and stepped out into the cool morning. The walk to the neighbor's field was short, but every step felt weighted with purpose. The dirt road was still damp from the night's dew, cool against the soles of his boots. Birds called from the fence posts sharp, bright notes of meadowlarks and red-winged blackbirds. The sugar beet field waited ahead, rows upon rows of vivid green, stretching like an emerald sea under the rising sun. Mist rose in delicate spirals from the leaves, catching the light in tiny prisms. Ezra reached the edge of the field. He set down his water jug, rolled up his sleeves, and gripped the short-handled hoe. The wooden handle was smooth from years of use, worn to fit his palm perfectly. He took one deep breath, the air sharp with the green, peppery scent of beet tops, and bent to begin. He did not know it yet, but he was stepping into a day that would etch itself forever into his memory, a day that would become a cornerstone of the man he would grow to be, Secretary of Agriculture of the United States, Apostle of the Church, and eventually President of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But on this morning, he was simply a boy of 16, standing at the edge of an impossible task, ready to prove to himself, to his family, to the land itself, that with faith, grit, and unrelenting effort, even the impossible could be done. The sky above Cache Valley was still the deep indigo of pre-dawn when Ezra Taft Benson stepped out of the house. The air hit him like a cold slap crisp, almost biting, laced with the faint metallic tongue of frost that had settled overnight on the grass and the edges of the roof. His breath puffed out in small white clouds that hung for a moment before dissolving. The farmyard was quiet, except for the soft creak of the windmill turning lazily in the breeze and the distant, muffled cluck of hens stirring in the coop. Somewhere far off, a dog barked once sharp and lonely, then fell silent. Ezra carried his short-handled hoe over one shoulder like a rifle. The wooden handle, worn smooth by years of calloused palms, his father's before his, was cool against his neck. The blade, 4 inches wide and freshly sharpened the night before, glinted faintly in the first gray light. He had oiled it himself, the metallic scent still clinging to his fingers. In his other hand swung a tin canteen filled with well water cold enough to make his teeth ache, and a small cloth bundle his mother had pressed into his palm at breakfast. 2 thick slices of bread spread with butter and wild strawberry jam, a wedge of sharp cheddar, 2 hard-boiled eggs still warm from the stove, and 1 red apple from last fall's harvest, its skin wrinkled but sweet. The walk to the neighbor's field was short, less than a mile, along a dirt road rutted by wagon wheels and packed hard by summer traffic. His boots crunched softly on the gravel, each step sending tiny puffs of dust into the air. The road smelled of dry sagebrush and horse manure, mixed with the clean green perfume of alfalfa fields on either side. Meadowlarks called from fence posts high, liquid notes that rose and fell like music. A red-winged blackbird flashed scarlet epaulets as it darted from a cattail clump near the irrigation ditch. When he reached the field, the sun was just beginning to edge above the mountains, turning the eastern sky a soft peach color. The sugar beet rows stretched out before him like an emerald ocean, hundreds of long, straight lines of vivid green seedlings, each no taller than his ankle, growing so densely that the soil between them was barely visible. The field was perfectly flat, bordered on one side by a poplar windbreak whose leaves rustled like distant rain. The air here smelled strongly of the beets themselves, a peppery, earthy green scent, sharp and alive, mixed with the rich, dark loam underneath. 1 acre. He had heard the men talk about it for years. An acre of thinning was a man's full day's work, sometimes more. The short-handled hoe forced you to stay bent over, face close to the dirt, back curved like a bow drawn tight. Every chop required precision. Slice away the weaker seedlings, leave the strongest ones spaced 8 to 12 inches apart, so the roots could swell into fat, sugar-rich beets by harvest. Miss one, and you wasted space. Leave too many, and the plants competed for water and nutrients, yielding smaller roots and less sugar. The work was monotonous, punishing, relentless. Most men came in at dusk hobbling, backs locked in spasm, hands raw, swearing they'd never do it again until the next contract. Ezra set the canteen and bundle in the shade of a lone cottonwood at the field's edge. He rolled up his sleeves, the fabric stiff with yesterday's sweat and dust. He adjusted the brim of his straw hat, took one last deep breath, the air tasting of sage and distant pine, and bent to the first row. The first swing was clean. The blade bit into the soft soil with a satisfying thud, severing a cluster of excess seedlings. Tiny green tops fell aside in a neat pile, releasing a fresh burst of that peppery beet scent. He stepped forward, swung again. The rhythm came quickly. Bend, chop, pull the cut plants aside with his free hand, shuffle a step, repeat. The soil was cool and moist under the early sun, giving easily, almost gratefully. Each chop sent a small tremor up his arms, a familiar jolt he had known since childhood. The first hour passed in near silence. Birds sang overhead. A hawk circled high above the valley, its shadow gliding across the rows. Ezra's muscles were warm now, loose, responding without protest. Sweat began as a faint sheen on his forehead, then gathered into drops that rolled down his temples, salty on his lips. He licked them away without thinking, tasting the mineral bite of the well water he had drunk earlier. By mid-morning, the sun had climbed higher, burning off the last wisps of mist. The light turned harsh, white-hot. Heat pressed down like a heavy hand. Ezra's shirt darkened across the shoulders and back, clinging weightly to his skin. Sweat trickled steadily into his eyes, stinging. He wiped it away with a forearm, leaving a streak of dirt. The short handle forced him to stay low face, only a foot or two above the dirt. Neck craned forward, spine curved in a constant arc. The ache started then, a dull fire in the small of his back, spreading upward like slow-moving lava. His shoulders burned with the forward pull of every swing. His legs, braced wide for balance, trembled faintly. He did not stop. He could not. The rhythm had become a mantra. Chop, step, thousands of plants, tens of thousands. The field seemed to stretch forever, row after row, disappearing into the shimmering heat haze. Dust rose in small clouds with every strike, coating his lips, settling in his throat, making each breath feel gritty and thick. Around noon, the heat reached its peak. The sun stood directly overhead, a relentless white coin in a cloudless sky. Ezra's hat brim cast a narrow band of shadow across his face, but the back of his neck felt scorched, skin tightening like parchment. Sweat poured freely, running in rivulets down his chest, soaking his shirt until it clung like a second skin. His hands, toughened by years of work, began to blister where the handle rubbed against the base of his thumbs. Each swing sent fresh stings through the raw spots. He paused only long enough to unwrap the handkerchief from his pocket, wrap it around his right palm, but the cloth soaked through almost immediately, turning pink with blood and dirt. He sat briefly on the irrigation ditch bank boots, dangling above the slow-moving water for lunch. The bread was soft, slightly sweet with jam, the cheese sharp and cool on his tongue. The eggs were still warm, yolk rich and golden. The apple crunched loudly in the stillness, juice bursting across his lips, dark, refreshing, grounding. He drank deeply from the canteen, the metal cold against his mouth, water tasting faintly of iron. Then he poured a little over his head, gasping as it trickled down his scalp, neck, and back in icy streams. For a moment, relief pure, fleeting cut through the heat. But the field waited. He stood, brushed crumbs from his lap, and returned. The afternoon was the crucible. The sun beat down without mercy, turning the air thick and heavy. Every bend forward was now agony. Every rise to shuffle forward sent sharp protests through his lower spine. His back felt as though someone had driven iron spikes into it, twisting with each movement. His legs shook with fatigue, thighs burning, knees threatening to buckle. Blisters on both hands had broken open, skin torn and weeping. Blood mixed with sweat and dirt, turning the handle slick and reddish-brown. The pain was no longer localized, it was everywhere. In his wrists, elbows, shoulders, neck, lower back, hips, calves. Each breath came shallow, labored. Yet he kept the rhythm. Chop, step, chop, step. He began counting rows in his head, not to measure progress, but to anchor himself. 10 rows, 20, 30. The sun slid westward, lengthening shadows, turning the light from harsh white to warm gold. Dust coated his lips, throat raw. His vision blurred slightly from sweat and exhaustion. He thought of his father, far away preaching the gospel, trusting him to keep the family farm alive. He thought of his mother rising before dawn to bake bread, mend clothes, tend the garden, and still find time to read scriptures to the younger ones. He thought of Margaret Orville, the little ones waiting at home, who depended on this $12 for shoes, flour, the mortgage payment. He thought of the teachings etched into his soul since childhood. That work was honorable, that God expected effort, that true strength came not from avoiding hardship, but from meeting it head on. The glory of God is intelligence, the scriptures said, or in other words, light and truth. But light and truth, he had learned young, often came through sweat, sore muscles, and the refusal to quit. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, something shifted inside him. The pain was still there, intense, unrelenting, but it no longer dominated. It became part of the rhythm, like the swing of the hoe, like the beat of his heart. He was exhausted, bone deep, soul-weary exhausted, but he was not broken. When the last ray of sunlight slipped behind the mountains, Ezra straightens, slowly, painfully, vertebrae popping like dry twigs, and looked back. The field was transformed. Rows upon rows of perfectly spaced beet plants stood in military formation. Excess seedlings cleared away, soil smooth and dark between them. 1 full acre, completed from sunup to sundown. For a long suspended moment, he simply stood there, chest heaving, hands hanging limp at his sides, staring at what he had done. The ache in his body was profound, overwhelming, but so was the quiet triumph rising in his chest like a tide. He had done it. Not a grown man, not a team of workers, just him. A 16-year-old boy who had refused to stop. The neighbor arrived on horseback as the first stars began to appear. He dismounted, walked the rows slowly, eyes widening with each step. He stopped at the end, turned, and looked at Ezra with something close to reverence. "I figured 2 days, maybe 3, the man said, voice low. "Never in my life thought one boy could do this." He reached into his pocket and drew out the payment. 2 $5 gold pieces, gleaming softly in the twilight, and 2 silver dollars. $12. He placed them carefully in Ezra's blistered, blood-streaked palm. Ezra closed his fingers around the coins. They felt heavy, cool, real. He looked down at them, then up at the man, and said simply, "Thank you, sir," as he walked home under the emerging stars, the coins jingling softly in his pocket. Every step sent fresh waves of pain through his back and legs. But the pain was different now. It was the pain of victory. It was the pain of proof. He had not just thinned a field. He had rewritten what was possible. He had learned, deep in his bones, that limits are often only what we accept, that endurance is a choice, and that the true farmer, the real farmer, never quits. The last sliver of sunlight slipped behind the bare river range, leaving the sky a deepening indigo streaked with the final embers of orange and rose. Twilight settled over the sugar beet field like a soft blanket, cooling the scorched air, quieting the insects that had hummed relentlessly all day. Ezra Taft Benson stood motionless at the far end of the acre he had just completed. His body was a map of exhaustion. Back locked in a rigid curve from 10 hours of bending, shoulders throbbing as if someone had hammered iron bars into the muscle, legs trembling beneath him like young aspen in a windstorm. His hands raw, blistered, bloodied hung at his sides. The short-handled hoe still gripped loosely in his right palm, the blade now dulled with soil and sap. He did not move for a long time. The field around him had changed beyond recognition. What had been a dense, chaotic carpet of green seedlings at sunrise was now a precise, orderly army of single plants, each standing alone in its own circle of dark earth, spaced perfectly 8 to 12 inches apart. The rows ran straight as plumb lines from one end of the acre to the other, the cut tops lying in neat windrows along the edges like green confetti. The smell of fresh-cut beet leaves hung heavy in the cooling air, sharp, peppery, alive, mingled with the deeper, richer scent of disturbed soil and the faint metallic tang of his own sweat and blood. He lifted his head slowly, vertebrae popping in small, painful cracks. The first stars were appearing, faint pinpricks in the velvet sky. Somewhere far off, a cow lowed once, low and mournful. A meadowlark gave its final liquid call of the day. The silence that followed felt enormous, almost sacred. Ezra looked down at the coins in his open palm. 2 $5 gold pieces, their surfaces catching the last dying light in dull gleams, and 2 silver dollars, heavy and cool against his torn skin. $12. More money than he had ever held at one time in his young life. Enough to buy new shoes for Orville and Margaret. Enough to help with the winter coal order. Enough to ease the constant, quiet worry in his mother's eyes when she counted the pantry shelves. But the money was not the real weight in his hand. The real weight was the knowledge that he had done something that grown men said could not be done. Not by a boy, not by one person, not in a single day. He closed his fingers around the coins, feeling the edges bite into the raw blisters. The pain was sharp, immediate, but it felt strangely distant, as though it belonged to someone else's body. His own body was still here, aching, trembling, alive, but something deeper had shifted. Something inside him had been forged in the heat and the hurt of the day, and it would never quite be the same again. Slowly, stiffly, he began the walk home. Each step was an effort. His boots felt filled with lead. His knees threatened to buckle. His back screamed with every movement. Yet he walked steadily, head up, eyes fixed on the faint glow of lamplight coming from the windows of the Benson farmhouse, a mile away. The road was dark now, but he knew every rut, every stone, every dip by heart. Crickets sang in the ditches. A bat fluttered overhead, wings whispering against the night air. The scent of sagebrush and cooling earth rose around him, comforting, familiar. As he walked, memories rose unbidden. He remembered the first time he had thinned beets at age 10, following his father down the rows, trying to copy the older man's precise economical swing. He had lasted less than an hour before collapsing in tears, back spasming, hands bleeding. His father had knelt beside him, large calloused hand on the boy's shoulder, voice gentle. "It hurts, son. It's supposed to hurt, but the hurt passes. What matters is whether you get back up." He remembered the winter of 1913, when his father left for his mission. The house had felt suddenly too large, too quiet. Ezra had risen every morning at 4 to milk the cows, the barn lantern casting long shadows across the warm, steaming animals. He remembered the smell of fresh milk in the pail, the soft swish of tails, the way the cats gathered around his feet, meowing for the first squirt. He remembered coming back into the kitchen at dawn, face frozen, fingers numb, to find his mother already at the stove, apron tied, hair pinned up, smiling at him as though nothing in the world was wrong. He remembered the scripture his mother read to the younger children every evening, voice steady even when her eyes were tired. And now, "My sons, remember that it is upon the rock of our Redeemer, who is Christ, the Son of God, that thou must build your foundation. That when the devil shall send forth his mighty winds, yea, his shafts in the whirlwind, yea, when all his hail and his mighty storm shall beat upon you, it shall have no power over you to drag you down to the gulf of misery and endless woe, because of the rock upon which ye are built, which is a sure foundation, a foundation whereon if men build they cannot fall." He had not understood the full depth of those words then. Now, walking home with every muscle screaming, the meaning felt carved into his very bones. When he finally reached the yard, the house was lit from within. Golden lamplight spilled from the windows onto the packed dirt. The smell of supper potato soup, fresh bread, perhaps a little bacon drifted out to meet him. He paused at the gate, hand on the rough cedar post, suddenly aware of how he must look. Shirt soaked and filthy, face streaked with dust and sweat, hands wrapped in bloodied handkerchiefs, posture stiff as an old man's. The door opened before he could move. Sarah Benson stepped onto the porch, apron still tied around her waist, a dish towel in her hands. She saw him and froze. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then she was running skirts flying down the steps, across the yard, and into his arms. She did not care that he was filthy. She did not care that he smelled of sweat and dirt and blood. She simply held him, tightly, fiercely, as though he might disappear if she let go. "You did it?" she whispered against his shoulder. "You really did it." Ezra could only nod. His throat was too tight for words. Inside, The younger children crowded around, eyes wide, voices overlapping in excitement. Margaret touched his arm gingerly, as though he might be made of glass. Orville stared at the coins when Ezra opened his hand, mouth forming a perfect O of astonishment. The little ones tugged at his pant legs, asking if he was hurt, if it really took all day, if the neighbor had paid him the full amount. Sarah shooed them gently back to the table, then guided Ezra to the wash basin. She poured warm water from the kettle, added a little lye soap, and washed his hands herself, slowly, tenderly, wincing at every torn blister and broken blister. She did not speak while she worked. She did not need to. The love in her movements said everything. Supper was quiet. Ezra ate slowly, every swallow an effort. The soup was warm, rich, comforting. The bread was soft, but he could barely taste it. His body was shutting down, retreating into itself. When the dishes were cleared, Sarah sent the children to bed with extra kisses, then sat beside him on the porch steps. The night was full of stars, now millions of them, sharp and bright in the high mountain air. A soft breeze rustled the poplars. Somewhere far off, an owl called. Sarah reached over and took his injured hand in both of hers. "I'm proud of you, T," she said quietly, "not just because you finished the job, but because you didn't quit when it hurt, because you kept going when everything inside you wanted to stop. That's the kind of strength that lasts, not the kind that comes from muscles, the kind that comes from inside." Ezra looked up at the stars. His eyes stung not from sweat this time, but from something deeper. "I thought about you," he said, voice rough, "all day. I thought about Dad. I thought about the little ones. I thought, if I quit, what would that teach them?" Sarah squeezed his hand. "And what did it teach you?" He was silent for a long time. "That it's possible," he said finally, "to go beyond what you think you can do, that the hurt passes, that if you just keep putting one foot in front of the other, keep swinging the hoe one more time, one more row, eventually the field gets finished." He paused. "And that a farmer never quits, not because he's not tired, not because it doesn't hurt, but because quitting means the work doesn't get done, and the work has to get done." Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder. For a long time, neither spoke. Then she whispered, "You're going to do great things, my boy. Not because you're smarter or stronger than other people, but because you won't quit." Ezra did not answer. He didn't need to. The truth of her words settled into him like water into parched earth. That night, he slept on his stomach, body too sore to lie any other way. Sleep came in fragments, painful, restless. But when he woke in the dark before dawn, the first thought in his mind was not the ache in his back. It was the field. It was finished. And he had finished it. Years later, decades later, when Ezra Taft Benson stood before congregations as an apostle, when he sat in the cabinet room as Secretary of Agriculture under President Eisenhower, when he was sustained as president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, he would return to that day again and again, not because of the $12, not because of the neighbor's astonishment, but because of the lesson burned into his soul under that relentless Idaho sun. The true measure of a man is not in what he can do when he feels strong, but in what he does when every fiber of his being screams to stop. He would tell the story hundreds of times, in talks, in interviews, in quiet conversations with young people who felt overwhelmed by life's demands. And always, he would end the same way. "I learned that day that the farmer, the real farmer, never quits. Not when it hurts, not when he's tired, not when it looks impossible. He just keeps going. One more row, one more swing, one more step. And because he keeps going, the field gets finished, the harvest comes, and life goes on." That single day in the summer of 1915 did not make Ezra Taft Benson a great man, but it revealed the greatness already inside him. and it taught him a truth he would carry for the rest of his 94 years. The difference between the possible and the impossible is often nothing more than the refusal to quit. When the final breath left Ezra Taft Benson's chest on that quiet May afternoon in 1994, the world did not tremble. No thunder rolled. No vast crowds gathered in mourning. Only a circle of loved ones stood close, and the 16-year-old boy who once bent beneath the scorching Idaho sun until his body screamed, now an old man of 94 lay peacefully, as though he had just finished the very last acre of his life. He slipped away gently, the same way he had always lived, without noise, without demands. No one heard him complain. No one saw him give up. Yet somewhere, across the fields of Cache Valley, across decades and continents, millions of souls he had quietly led felt a soft, invisible pull in their hearts. They bowed their heads and whispered thank you, not to a famous man, but to the boy who refused to quit when every muscle begged him to stop. Picture that moment. A 94-year-old man, once a barefoot teenager gripping a short-handled hoe, once soaked in sweat so heavy his shirt clung like a second skin, once trembling as he held $12 like the weight of the entire world now lying still, hands wrinkled but still bearing the faint scars of old calluses. He left behind no palaces. He left behind no mountains of gold. But he left behind seeds, not just seeds of sugar beets, but seeds of resilience, seeds of faith, seeds of never give up. Every spring, when apple blossoms open in soft white-pink clouds across the valleys he once walked, when sugar beet fields rise again in vivid green under the same relentless sun, people still feel him, not through statues, not through history books, but through the lives he touched. Fathers who still rise at 4 in the morning to tend cattle, even when their backs ache. Mothers who still smile through exhaustion. Young people facing failure and wanting to surrender. They all hear the same quiet whisper from the past. Just one more row. Just one more swing of the hoe. Don't stop now. He never called himself great. He only said, I did what needed doing. And I didn't quit. But because he didn't quit, a farm boy from Whitney became Secretary of Agriculture of the United States, became an apostle, became a prophet, a man who guided millions of souls through the storms of the 20th century. And because he didn't quit, today when you feel tired, when your hands shake and your heart wants to let go, you can still hear his voice, low and steady, like wind moving through a field. A farmer never quits, not because it doesn't hurt, not because he isn't exhausted, but because if he stops, the field never gets finished. And the field has to be finished. Life has to go on. If this story makes your eyes sting, if a warm ache spreads through your chest, mixed with a little regret that you never met him, yet filled with gratitude that you live in a world that once held a man like Ezra Taft Benson, then please, do one small thing that matters deeply to your own heart. Subscribe to the channel right now. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because every week, we will walk together to rediscover stories time has tried to bury ordinary people with extraordinary hearts. People who quietly planted seeds of hope for generations they would never meet. They never made headlines. They never had bronze statues. But they are the reason we still believe in goodness, still believe that hardship passes, still believe that if we don't give up, anything is possible. Subscribing is your way of whispering back to the 16-year-old Ezra in 1915, to the 94-year-old prophet in 1994, and to yourself. I'm still listening. I still believe. I won't let these beautiful stories die. Let's keep the fire burning together. Let's keep planting the most beautiful seeds of feeling in each other's hearts. Subscribe today, because that 16-year-old boy finished an acre of sugar beets in a single day. Now it's our turn to thin away doubt, to thin away fear, so our own lives can bloom. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart. And I'll see you in the next story.